Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. My name is Dave Bookbinder. I am your host, and welcome back to the program where we dig deeper to understand what really matters most in business. Today, I've got a very interesting guest. I can honestly tell you I have never had a corporate anthropologist on the program before, but today we do. And I'm pleased to welcome Andi Simon, who's founder, CEO. She is a corporate anthropologist. She's also a podcast host, and she is author of the book, Women Mean Business. Andi, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
David, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. I have to start by asking you to please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us all, what is a corporate anthropologist?
It's a great question. I made it up. Let me tell you a little bit of the journey. I was an academic for a decade. I got my tenure. I was going to be a professor forever. And I loved what I did. I had a postdoc. I took my daughters to Greece to study Greek immigrants and return migration. And I was doing a classic social scientist career path. And by chance, my husband was an executive at Citibank during deregulation. And I was invited to become a consultant for Citibank to help them change. So I stuck around and I was in banking for 14 years. I was an executive at two banks, all to help them change. And then I got into healthcare for 7 years during the managed care transformation. And if you can hear the journey, it was all about things that were changing and people needed to change. And I happened to be very comfortable helping them do that. After 9/11, I launched my business. My PR firm said, okay, what are we going to position you as? And I gave him my story and he said, you're a corporate anthropologist that helps companies change. And I said, that fits so well. That's my brand, my purpose, and my passion. And that's how I became a corporate anthropologist. So what I do is help companies that need or want to change. And I learned very early on, they didn't hire me for what I did. They hired me for what they needed. And then my business took off and faster than I could imagine. And I've been doing that for 23 years now.
Yeah, you're going to have to unpack that just a little bit. When you said they didn't hire you for what you did, they hired you for what they needed. Tell us
Well,
more.
my first book that you mentioned, On the Brink, my first book, which you didn't mention, On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights, is about 8 clients of our many who were stuck or stalled. And I learned early on, university, a healthcare client, manufacturer, that they went looking for someone who could help them do something that didn't seem to be working for them. They were stuck. New customers weren't coming. They had new products that weren't selling. They were stuck or stalled. And I came in with a fresh perspective. I often took my clients out exploring. Let's go be anthropologists. Let's go hang out at your clients and let's see what they're doing and begin to understand how they're using your products or not and why they're not buying what you think is obvious to them. Maybe it's positioned wrong. And so what I began to do is take them exploring with me. We talk about being curious. I can provide a gap filler and a way of seeing things that they are stuck within their story. And so we do ethnographic work. We sit and we watch things in hospital lobbies. We listen and talk to people at manufacturing plants, but we take our clients with us wherever we can. And when we're done, we walk out and we write down everything we thought we saw or heard, only what we thought we saw or heard. And then we realized we were in 2 different places at the same time. And our minds were segmenting out what mattered to us. I'm looking for the gaps and opportunities, and they were looking for the fit. And then the conversations began. What are we missing here? What are our clients doing and telling us? And then we can only do by observational research, ethnographic research, by actually going and watching him, sometimes actually doing it with them. Show me how to do something, and I begin to understand it. And so my approach to helping our clients is to help them, and I say these words intentionally, see, feel, and think in new ways because we decide with the eyes and the heart, and then our brain gets involved with making sense out of it. I hope that helps a little. I can keep unpacking with stories to share, but it
Yeah,
is a journey that I've been enjoying for a while now, and it's really helpful. Please.
yeah, I'm going to have you share some stories a little bit later, certainly before we're done this conversation, but I want to do a little more framing for that, if you don't mind. Again, you were my first corporate anthropologist on the program, and I know you were excited to come on the show because it's called Behind the Numbers. And as we all know, that the magic in business really happens beyond what you see on the statements, whether they're spreadsheets or financials. And the idea of a corporate anthropologist helps to lend a deeper understanding of the why behind the numbers. And I'd like you to share a little bit about that.
One of the things that we're taught first thing into anthropology. Remember, we're observational, qualitative data collectors, although at times I go into the hard numbers too. But one of the earliest things we learned is out of context, data have no meaning, or data has no meaning, depending on how you think about it. So if it's behind the numbers, the question is, what is really behind those numbers? I used to teach, for example, a program called Your Data is Talking to You, Can You Hear It? And this was for healthcare strategists who had an abundance of data. And what they were doing was finding the data that affirmed or confirmed their own belief system to be true. And then they would present that in various ways to different levels in an organization, hoping it would influence what they were doing or affirm what they were doing. And what I began to show them was that they were only finding the numbers that were consistent with what they thought they ought to be. And all the real interesting questions were around the outside, on the edges. And slowly I began to show them how it wasn't the data that they believed to be true. You only found the good stuff, but all the data that was not being considered at all, that could offer opportunities on trends, on new directions. So the first thing behind the numbers is, what's the story the number is telling you? And is it the one you believe to be true? There's no reality here. There's no truth. There's only what you believe to be. Or is it the numbers that are really accurate and happening? And when you don't go, I'll give you like a case in a moment, but if you don't go out and watch, it's hard to know what those numbers mean. The second thing is that the story a strategist in a healthcare company, for example, tells the C-suite isn't the same story that they may tell a doctor or somebody who's managing a facility. And so if you don't apply the right criteria to the right data, it has no meaning for the person you're telling the story to. So if you tell the same data to everybody, some will get it and some won't know what it means for them. And if you don't make it applicable, now that doesn't mean you're changing the data or you're altering it. It does mean that much of the data can be interpreted in different ways for yourself. And I've been doing a lot of ethnographic work for clients in the last 3 or 4 years that have been quite revealing about what the data was telling them and what the behaviors were illustrating. So it becomes important behind the numbers that you really understand whether you're influencing your biases, influencing what you're capturing, or it's really a reflection of what's actually happening, whether it's internal, external, product sold, how it's sold, and what might be more important is what you're not telling. And don't run away from the ones that don't seem to fit. They could be illustrative of something important happening. Does that help?
Yeah, and look, in this world, we're all talking about big data, data sets, managing data. You can't manage what you can't measure. Everything is all about data in large quantities, mass volumes. But to your point, you've got to put context around it. So how do you break through the noise of the data to really understand what's happening behind it, right? A lot of folks have preconceived notions, as you alluded to, whether it's a desired outcome, whether it's intentionally or subconsciously just leaning towards a solution. How do you break through that preconceived notion noise?
Well, let me give you an illustration, if I may, at this point. That
Certainly.
may really bring it to light. I had a client who invited us to help work with them to understand what quality meant in senior living communities. Their data, the surveys that they applied and the data that they captured were just really frustrating. They thought they had a wonderful facility with great services, food, staff, and all the rest, but they were all getting mediocre grades. The data wasn't telling them that this was as a wonderful place. Competitively, there were lots of options. And what was the difference between the people who were there and the data that they were capturing? Now, there may be different data than some of the data your listeners, viewers, or clients may be thinking about, but it was good data. She had all these surveys, multiple years of them, and they were all mediocre. So, and one of the things that challenged her was that the poorer communities, the less expensive ones, actually had better data, better results than the more expensive ones. So she sought me out as an anthropologist who might give her some observational research about what does quality really mean to the people who are paying $7,000 or $8,000 a month in these wonderful luxury senior living communities. And so I went and I hung out. I actually lived in these communities for several weeks. And they gave me a whole, cohort of people to interview. And the stories they were telling us were all stories that I wanted to hear about why they were there and what does quality mean and how well is this institution providing it. What was so fascinating was that the things they were asking them about had nothing to do with the stories they were telling us. And was so interesting. And one, there were a lot of men there because their wives either had Alzheimer's or had died and they didn't know how to cook. And while they bought beautiful apartments, they came there because of the gourmet food they were supposed to get. But the food wasn't gourmet and it didn't always come out hot. And the wine that was supposed to be with the food, the sommelier didn't really know much about it. And so the expectations they had coming in, paying a lot of money, was that these folks who had been senior executives, presidents, entrepreneurs, were coming into a place to have a life that was of high quality. Was it bad? No. But was it of the quality expected? Not at all. And so, as they said, the questions they're asking us don't reflect the reality of what we're actually receiving. The second thing they told us is we have anything to do. So we get up every day and we go to meetings. And we sit down, we analyze what's good or bad and how to improve it. And we take our recommendations to the executive director. And he ignores us. He deletes us. And he doesn't give us the respect due us. Now, here's an institution built for high quality experiences for older adults. And these were really smart people who could articulate to you the gap between how they would fill out the forms, the data, and how it would be reflective and what the actual experience was like. In the second one, I'll say a more modestly priced one, everybody who was in there was put in there by and large, not everyone, but many of them by their children who could not take care of them in their own independent homes. They thought they were in a prison. They weren't getting out. And one couple in particular fascinated me because they had been divorced for 30 years, but their kids thought they would be better off together in the community. And she said, I'm still in business and I have to take care of someone I haven't been married to for 30 years. The stories become soft data. They became a way of capturing it. Now, we put this through an analysis system we have to begin to capture the recurring patterns. So it's not an anecdote or an anecdote. It's a group of people sharing similar stories over and over again. And the words can be all analyzed and give us hard data that is pretty interesting and precise for how many times the same things are being said. It doesn't matter who said them, the same themes that were coming through. And it offered a different way of capturing what quality meant in an organization. Now, her surveys had been established, used by many kinds of organizations. I don't discount them. But what were they capturing actually? Not really the experiences she was looking for. Now, for your listeners or your viewers, the data they're looking at reflects behavior. The question is, what is it actually reflecting? Whether it's a purchase or satisfaction or engagement, what is the behavior behind the response? And how is the bias of the responder influencing the response that they're giving? I love that story because it was really ethnographic work that helped me understand it. And the other part was that as I played it back to the people, they were all in agreement that what they were asking on the survey didn't reflect what actually is existing there. And I think that becomes a way of getting into the deeper question of what is the data really telling us?
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. And I think most people with elderly parents can probably be nodding and listening to this and thinking, yeah, I've been there and certainly understand what you're talking about with regard to the senior living experience. But the interesting thing is you embedded yourself in that environment. You became a part of the community. And it feels like that's the secret sauce. Are you always embedded in the organizations in such a fashion?
Maybe. When it's possible, for example, I had several healthcare clients and I just spent days and days and days inside the hospital observing what people were doing and watching what the gaps were and talking to the staff. And in one place, I became a contract employee and I was the interim SVP doing things. And I knew the CEO quite well. And he said, come help me change. And the best way to do it was to be part of it. But I've worked with manufacturers and I could not become part of their company, but I did become very involved with the people buying their product. And this was a water filler station sat on top of a water fountains. And the company who hired us didn't know why it wasn't selling. And so we went and we tried to understand what was going on in the colleges that were buying it, as opposed to the architects or engineers who thought they ought to be buying it. And we really try to get close enough to begin to feel what the reason was. And when they finally told us it's not about filling the water bottle, it's about killing it, there was a trigger that went off that said, there's a whole different set of values for what you're trying to sell in a whole different venue that you're trying to sell it. And you need a different sales process than your manufacturer's reps. So I tried to become attuned. Remember, we decide with the eyes and the heart. My job is to help them feel what they may not be able to from the place they're at. When you're running a company, it's very hard to understand how it's being actually used. My own urging for the C-suite is to get out, hang out, and go watch. I had a wonderful company that made point of sale stuff, and I made them go out, including the CEO, to see how they were actually being used. And they brought back all these pictures to show their award-winning stuff wasn't being used at all. And it's only when you go see it that you can become knowledgeable about what you're assuming. And I do see assumptions that you're challenging, and the numbers will affirm those assumptions or begin to help you see beyond them.
Interesting. And what's generally been the response of your clients when you deliver your results and the findings to them?
I'll tell you a story. Because the last thing you want to do is be deleted because you couldn't have seen them. I had a great client who was losing their clients because their service wasn't good. So I said, give me a dozen of your best clients to interview. And I took interviews from all of them. And I sat down with the management team and I said, listen to your customers, not me. Because if I told you what they said, you will say I misheard them. Couldn't be. And each one of them gave a different set of scenarios about why they were okay. They were an 8, not a 10, why they might not use them again, why their services weren't perfect, why they needed other things. By the time they listened to them, they said, oh my gosh, we're not what we think we are. And I said, yes, through the eyes of the customer, the voice of that customer. But I must tell you, I didn't need to go out to the customer, but I did need to capture their voices, because if not, I become a bad translator. And it's much better if you can experience it in some fashion directly from, and the voice of the customer research has been around for a long time. But what I love to do is get them so engaged in that, they begin to see a different customer emerging from it. This particular client changed their whole business strategy, and all of a sudden customers were coming to them and they were just simply saying, we don't do that. Now they were doing it and business was growing. It's very interesting.
You can almost hear them yelling aha in the background as you're sharing the stories.
That's just what they said.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It was like, aha.
Exactly. So listen, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about your books. We'll talk about each of them, and I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about what they can get from them, and then you'll tell us where we can get the books themselves. But you mentioned On the Brink, Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights. Tell us about that one first.
That was my first book. And I always think the writing journey is a treacherous one. I had a friend who was an editor, and he said, you need to write a book about being an anthropologist. And so I drafted one and drafted one and drafted one. And I actually had an agent, and then she fired me, and I really didn't know what I was doing. Then neophyte has a lot of hurdles to hurdle. And finally, I was at a Vistage meeting doing a presentation, and the president of a hybrid publisher, Greenleaf Books, was there. And she said, we only accept 10% of the books you submit, but submit yours. And I got a call back, and she said, we love the book, but you have to rewrite it. And I went, she said, but we have a development editor who will work with you closely. And they did. Now, hybrid is different from a traditional publisher. You pay, but the resources were first class. And out of it came a really good book, my book, but rewritten from a perspective of a reader that really, from the editor was wonderful at helping me understand what I was doing versus what I had to do. So that was my first book. And that book brought me great clients. I was in Mexico 3 times, India for 5 clients, Mexico, Canada. It sold really well, won awards. And it was stories of 8 of our clients who were stuck or stalled. And I often started with a story about finding acres of diamonds all around you. They're here, if only you can see them. And different industries, it became a sales tool, but also an affirmation of what corporate anthropologists can do and how you can do it. I've had pictures sent to me from beaches where the book is sitting on the beach and they're reading it. And I went, ooh. My second book came about because my husband and I had a program at Washington University. I had been a visiting professor there. And we invested in a program there for 3 years called the Simon Initiative for Entrepreneurship. We wanted to help, my husband's an entrepreneur, we wanted to help entrepreneurs come out of the university raring to go, which they could. The women had the biggest problem. They needed role models. So I started to do research and I started to interview women entrepreneurs. And after having, many dozens, I found the group that I thought reflected really cool women entrepreneurs. And as I was reading the stories to my husband, he said, they're smashing the myths of women in business. And I went, oh my God, that's a much better book. And so I went back
That's a great name. Yeah, absolutely.
I rewrote it with my editor and I said, this is the way, it's not just their story, it's what they're doing to assumptions. You can't be a geologist. Of course I can. And CEOs aren't good for women, for business. Of course they are. All kinds of myths. And so the book took on a life of its own. It too brought me great clients and still does, and won an award. And my last book, Women Mean Business, over 500 insights from extraordinary leaders to spark your success, was the idea of Edie Frazier, my co-author. And she called me after my second book, and she said, you want to write a book? And I said, about what? She said, I'm not sure. I said, I can do that. And so off we went. And I must tell you, these are 102 extraordinary women who wanted to share their wisdom with others. And we often talk about celebrating and elevating. One woman said, Sandra Quinn said, as I rise, I lift others. Tina Clark said, I want women to feel big ideas. And, it became a way of inspiring others. It has sold extremely well. We've had 50 plus events, and it's brought out the real excitement going on in women in business. I'm not sure I'm going to do a fourth book quite ready yet, and I'm not quite sure what inspires me, but if you can hear the theme, you need to find inspiration before you want to tell your stories. And I'm delighted with what I have created, and I love sharing it. Amazon loves you, so you can buy them all on Amazon.
Well, congratulations on all of that. And everything you shared there about the experience resonates because I never intended to write a book. I started by writing an article, and the article wound up becoming a series of articles, and it was a passion project. It was my journey to prove that people really are a company's most valuable asset. And in that process, it was interesting that I'll use the word attracted people from around the globe, basically, who approached me, and we wound up collaborating on this that ultimately became a book. And I only wrote when I was inspired. I never was told that I had a deadline or anything like that. I couldn't do that. So my best ideas usually came in the middle of the night and run downstairs to the office and fire up the computer and try and capture some notes and thoughts. And that's how that evolved. So congratulations. I've been told that when you write a book, it tells the world that you're at least thorough and you can complete a project. So there's that.
Well, and I do think having the right editors and publishers and PR folks help you. The ideas are good, but it's better if people can read them and see value in doing something with them. So
100%. Kudos to my editor. She pulled it all together for me and took my idea of articles and helped to weave them together so it all made sense coherently as a book and then a second book. But back to you here, Andi, because I want to ask you to share some practical advice for the audience. You've given us some great stories and insights on how people should be thinking about approaching their data and their situations. And when they ask the question, why isn't this working? Usually people don't tend to ask, I imagine, why is this working? Maybe they should do that more often, but that's another topic. But what can you share as maybe some practical takeaways for the audience who want to think about bringing the corporate anthropology process into their data analytics?
Well, I'm married to a serial entrepreneur, and he's a finance person by background. We had lots of data talks here. So my wisdom to the listener is that your data is talking to you. So when you start to look at the data, sit back and really try to think about what does it mean as opposed to what is on the page in some fashion. I like to look at trends, both the past that gives you some idea, but also, we can't go forward without some idea of what the future might bring. And scenario planning sounds sort of, do I have to? But it's not a bad idea to take the numbers and begin to think about, create a story about what you would like those future scenarios to look like, and then backward plan them. An innovation games facilitator and backward planning is essential if you're going to go forward. And I do think that you can't create the numbers, you can't predict them, but you can prepare for them. And I do think that the most important part of the numbers is to give you the scope of what has come, what is coming, and how are you going to be prepared for the changes that are invariably going to be here. And I don't care whether it's the new technology, the fourth industrial revolution, the changes in employees, hybrid or not hybrid, it doesn't matter. The business world that we're in today is very different than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not expecting another pandemic, but who knows? But you really do need to use the data for more than just a mirror of what's gone on, but for a tool to use for a growth mentality, so that you're curious about, what could and if and then how do we. Healthcare is particularly interesting to me because I worked in healthcare as an executive, but I was also fascinated by how unpredictable the numbers were. I mean, you could tell that on Super Bowl, you didn't have a lot of ER visits. That much I got. But the day after, you had a lot. And so one can begin to see some trends or patterns and how to staff appropriately. But I also think that the data can give you a visualization, a picture of your business in a way that's beyond simply where they are now and what you did last quarter or last year. And I don't know how that fits into the wisdom that you've been bringing, but I do like thinking forward. Michael Seligson at Penn has a wonderful book on human prospectus. We're futurists, and we are really wishing that we knew what the future brought, because that way we could live today better. But you do sort of have a feel for what the future is bringing if you take a good look at those numbers and you can see which way it's going up or down, and how well you can begin to see where it's coming from, and then who are the generators and where they're not, and just use them wisely. They are a reflection of behavior and beliefs.
Yeah, and in my world, it dovetails perfectly because in valuation, helping companies in valuing their businesses, one of the key methodologies is a forward-looking exercise. It's an income approach, and it requires a forecast. And you probably wouldn't be surprised to know that many entrepreneurs, when I ask them, "Do you have a business plan?" um, their eyes glaze over. Like, what do you mean? I barely know what next quarter is going to look like. So it's imperative that they give some thought to what the future might look like. And I've got a great crystal ball to help them with that whenever they need it. Andi, we're just about out of time here, but before we have to drop, I want you to tell the audience about your podcast, where they can get it, and how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you or if they want to work with you.
Dave, that's so kind. The website is simonassociates.net, and that's an S at the end of associates. And it has the books there. AndySimon.com is all about the books and the speaking engagements. And LinkedIn, of course, is always a great place to find people, and I'm there. And I like to post everything that we produce there as well. I'm delighted to have you reach me at asimon@simonassociates.net, but you can get those off the website or off LinkedIn. And I love to work with small, medium, and large businesses that are looking to see things through a fresh lens. It's a better way of saying to change. People hate change, but the times are changing. But if you want to see something differently and you don't quite know how to do it, you're stuck or stalled. The podcast is called On the Brink with Andi Simon, and you can dig that up right out of Google, or it's on the website. We've done over 420 podcast episodes over 7 years, and each one of them I find wonderfully unique stories of people who want to help you see, feel, and think in new ways like I do.
That is awesome. And the only constant is change. Andi, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Numbers. It was really a pleasure having you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, my pleasure. We've been talking with Andi Simon, my very first guest who is a corporate anthropologist. I hope you guys got a lot from that. I know I did. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and I'm known as an expert in business valuation. And if you are a business owner and don't know the value of your company, like frankly, most business owners don't, we should probably have a conversation. And you can find me on LinkedIn. want to thank you, the audience, for listening to this program. Really, really, truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already crushed that subscribe button, please do. Tell a friend about the program and spread the word about Behind the Numbers. That's all we have for today, folks. We'll catch you next time. Take care.